Just a few things about me. I'm originally from Philadelphia. I'm currently living in Burlington. Been there 3 years. I think this helps to give some sort of context to the poems, particularly the poems that I'll read today. Originally from Philadelphia, spent summers in Nashville, Tennessee, because that's where my family migrated from after the war, the Second War, World War II. And went to school at Temple, lived there in Philadelphia for 25 years. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And lived in Philadelphia for 25 years, then up in Providence, Rhode Island for a year, back down to Philly, and then all the way to Oregon. And my life started changing around that time because I decided, it was during that period in which I decided that I can write poetry full time. I was an accounting major, graduated with a degree in accounting, and then at some point made it, hence the blue jacket, by the way. Then at some point realized that I really am, I love language, and I love engaging, being inside of language. Let's start off with this poem. This is a poem called Blunts. The first time I got high, I stood in a circle of boys at 23rd and Ridge, tucked inside a doorway that smelled of urine. It was March. The cold rains all but blurred our sight as we feigned sophistication, passing a bullet-shaped bottle of malt. Johnny Cash had a love for transcendental numbers and explained between puffs resembling little gasps of air the link to all creation was the mathematician. Malik, the smartest of the crew, counter-argued and cited the holy life of prayer as a gateway to the Islamic faith that was for all intents the true path for the righteous black man. No one disputed. Malik cocked his head, pinched the joint, and pulled so hard we imagined his lips crazy glued into stiff O's. It was long agreed that Lefty would inherit his father's used car business, thus destined for a life of wrecks. Then, amid a fit of coughing, I broke the silence. I want to be a poet. It was nearing dinner time. Jesus lived here. His sister was yelling at their siblings over the evening news and game shows. The stench of hot dogs and sauerkraut drifted down the dank hallway. A pre-spring wind flapped the plastic covering of a junkman's shopping cart as Eddie Hardrick licked left to right the thin strip of glue at the edge of a rolling paper, then uttered, "So, you want the tongue of God." I bent double in the blade of smoke and looked up for help. It was too late. We were tragically hip. Oh. Normally I'd like to read that poem after I've been asked how did I become a poet. I think I grew up in Philadelphia in a time in which gang warfare was really big because of the drugs that it kind of hit Philadelphia in the 80s. And coming into my adolescent years, it made me very kind of internally reflective because I had friends that I was grieving as a young boy because of friends who were either shot as a result of crossfire or either locked up. And as someone who was going to school in North Philadelphia at Temple, and a number of my friends were not, I would come back and get my hair cut from this guy who watched all of us grow up. And so when I would get my hair cut from Mr. Pate, was his name, he would often tell me a story about a friend of mine and kind of the latest, not gossip, but it was like getting the news back home. The other thing you should know about this poem is that we had this rumor that he didn't throw away hair, that he collected it and he kept it in jars in the back of back of his head. Mr. Pate's barbershop. I remember the room in which he held a blade to my neck and scraped the dark hairs foresting a jawline. Stacks of ebonies and jets, clippings of black boxers, Joe Frazier, Jimmy Young, Jack Johnson. The color television, bolted to a ceiling, like the one I watched all night in the waiting room while my cousin recovered from gunshots. I remember the old Coke machine, a water fountain by the door, how I drank the summer of '88 over and over from a paper cone cup and still cannot quench my thirst. For this was the year funeral homes boomed, the year Mr. Pate swept his own shop, for he had lost his best little helper to crossfire. He suffered like most barbers suffered, quietly, his clippers humming so loud he forgot Ali's lightning left jab, his love for angles, for carpentry, for baseball. He forgot everything and would never be the same. I remember the way the blade gleamed fierce in the fading light of dusk, and a reflection of myself panned inside the razor's edge, wondering if I could lay down my pen, close up my ledgers and my journals, if I could undo my tie and take up barbering, where months on end a child's head would darken at my feet and bring with it the uncertainty of tomorrow, or like Mr. Pate, gathering clumps of fallen hair at the end of a day in short, delicate whisks, as though they were the fine findings of gold dust he'd deposit in a jar and place on a shelf, only to return Saturdays, collecting as an antique dealer collects, growing tired, but never forgetting someone has to cherish these tiny little heads. I had more about my neighborhood. There was a guy who, for as long as I remember, used to walk around like he was driving a car. Walk around like he was driving a car. And so, you know, you would see him downtown Philadelphia, you see him in your neighborhood. This guy made his way around. Anyway, and girls would, you know, tease him and ask him for a ride, and he would pretend like he would park the car and get out and open the door for him, and they'd be like, "Steve, you're crazy." Some kind of crazy. It doesn't matter if you can't see Steve's Corvette, turquoise-colored, plush purple seats, gold-trimmed rims that make little stars in your eyes, as if the sun is kneeling, kissing the edge of sanity, like a Baptist preacher stroking the dark underside of God's wet tongue. He can make you believe it's there. His scuffed wingtips, ragged as a mop, shuffling concrete, could be 10-inch Firestone wheels. His vocal cords fake an 8-cylinder engine that wags like a dog's tail when he shifts gears. Imagine Steve, moonstruck, cool, turning right onto Ridge Avenue, arms forming arcs, his hands a set of stiff C's, overthrowing each other's rule, his lithe body and head snapping back, pushing a stick shift into fourth, whizzing past Uncle Sam's pawn shop, past Chung Fat Stop and Go. Only he knows his destination, his limits. Can you see him? Imagine Steve, moonstruck, cool, parallel parking between a Pacer and a Pinto, obviously the most hip, backing up, head over right shoulder, one hand spinning as if polishing a dream. And there's Tina, wanting to know what makes a man tick, wanting a one-way trip to the stars. We, the faithful, never call him crazy, crack-brained, just a little touched. It's all he ever wants, a car, a girl, a community of believers. So I tried to be a rapper, and you see where that led me. And but I also tried to tried to break dance. And this is a poem about those early days, trying to break dance. Rock the Body Body for Cornelius Eady. One summer night, I learned the art of breakdancing from a guy I'd only known as Moon in exchange for algebra lessons on Mondays. A member of the Pop-Along Kids, Moon taught me how to flick my wrist and make a wave. Check out the electric boogie, he said, and worked like a robot, one hand extended, the fingers curling and uncurling as the arm joints and shoulders in one fluid motion followed each other like butterflies. I half watched, trying to mimic the simple placement of feet, but mainly I thought of all the girls that would soon form a circle as I created illusions with my body. So I went to school in my I had this very interesting change in my life. I lived with my grandparents because my parents divorced early, and in North Philadelphia. And then my mom married, and all of a sudden we were living in a very affluent section of Philadelphia. So I'm going to read two poems from that period. The first poem is I had a teacher in fourth grade, substitute teacher, who came midway, right after Christmas holidays, and she tried to call the roll, and she had a very difficult time because I grew up with a lot of kids who were named after, who had Arabic names. So she had a very difficult time pronouncing Shaquan and Rashida and Keisha. And so, so the next day, she came back to class and she renamed all of us after French painters. Urban Renewal, number 17. What of my fourth grade teacher at Reynolds Elementary, who, weary after failed attempts to set to memory names strange and meaningless as grains of dirt around the mouthless mountain caves at Bahrain Karai, Tariq, Shaniqua, Amari, Aisha, nicknamed the entire class after French painters, whether boy or girl. Behold, the beginning of sentient, formless life. And so my best friend Darnell became Marcel, and TT was Brock, and Stacy James was Fragonard, and I, Edouard Charlemont. The time has come to look at these signs from other points of view. Days pass in activity before I corrected her, for Edouard was Austrian and painted the Black Chief in a palace in 1878 to the question whether intelligence exists. All of Europe swooned to Venus of Willendorf. Outside her tongue, yet of it, in textbooks, Herodotus tells us of the legend of Siswasret, Egyptian, colonizer of Greece, founder of Athens. What's in a name? Sagas rise and fall in the orbs of jump ropes. Hannibal grasped a Roman monkey bar on history's rung. And the mighty heroes at recess lay dead in woe on the imagined battlefields of Halo. So moved up to a section of Philadelphia that's pretty affluent and feeling totally alienated, I think because of the move, but also because everyone was so cool, particularly these girls that I was attracted to. And that's a very tough thing, and I like what W.H. Auden in his poem to in memory of Yeats says, "Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry." And I like to think that, you know, it was those girls not paying any attention to me that hurt me into poetry. Urban Renewal 18. How untouchable the girls, arm-locked, strutting up the main hall of Central High, unopposed for decades looked. I flattened myself against the wall, unnerved by their cloud sea of elan, which pounced upon any timid girl regrettably in their way, their high wattage lifting slow motion like curls of light strands of honey, the swagger behind their blue-tinted sunglasses and low-rider jeans hurt boys like me, so vast the worlds between us, even the slightest whiff of recognition, an accidental side glance, an unintended tongue-piercing display of juicy fruit chew was intoxicating and could wildly cast a chess-playing geek into a week-long surmise of inner doubts, likelihoods, and depressions. You might say my whole life led to celebrating youth and how it snubs and rebuffs. Back then, I learned to avoid what I feared and to place my third-string hopes on a game-winning basketball shot, sure it would slow them to a stop, pan their lip gloss smiles, and bless me with their cool. So the Urban Renewal is a series that I started in the first book, but I found myself continuing to write more, and some more will be published in my next book called Hoops, which will be out in the fall. The abiding image behind this poem is the televangelist at the moment in which he goes to touch someone and they fall down. You've seen that, I'm sure. Urban Renewal 19. That moment in church when I stared at the Reverend's black kente panel robe and sash, his right hand clasping the back of my neck, the other seizing my forehead, standing in his watch this pose, a leg behind him ready to spring, his whole body leaning into the salvation of my wizened soul. I thought of the Saturday morning wrestlers of my youth, who'd hold their opponents till they collapsed on the canvas in a slumberous heap, and how it looked more like a favor, a deed, though barbarous, a graceful tour out of this world, that schizotic departure back to first waters, and wondered what pains I endured in Mr. Feltyberger's physics class, worshiping light, density, mass, preferring to stare long at snow domes, or the carcasses of flies pooling in the great fluorescent cover above my head, and how beds are graves, my mother and father kissing each other's head, cupping faces, unhurriedly laying the other down, and how all locked embraces light in my mind from below in blue neon, like you find on the undercarriage of some sports car. And then what came was the baker stacking her loaves one by one into little coffers. And then Desdemona's last surrender to Othello's piercing glance, and Isaac shone a militia of clouds over Moriah, and the dying we submerge in the baptism of pillows, and how we always loiter at this verge, there, between rising up and falling back, as a noun, this tank of sounds I'm frozen in, gripped between the push and yank of his clutch, caught in that rush of tambourines next to the solemn trays of grape juice and bits of crackers held by deacons when the Reverend, serious as a pew, whispered, "Fall down, my son, fall." It's somewhat basketball, not somewhat, it's a basketball poem. I play a lot of basketball. You kind of heard that in the previous poem. Play a lot of basketball. It wasn't terrible. I didn't grow tall, but I had aspirations. And I wanted to honor this one particular Catholic priest who, he never left that neighborhood and became somewhat of a father figure for a lot of the kids whose fathers wasn't present in their lives, Father Dave Hagen. And Dave had one kid who almost made it out of the neighborhood. He was a basketball star at University of California, I'm sorry, at Loyola Marymount in California, in LA. But he died right on national TV. This guy was like leading NCAA scorer his junior year, and then right on CBS, he's running and he collapses and has a seizure. And I knew that kid. We were at St. Elizabeth's together. And I knew his family, and he had children. He already had children. He had children when he was 17 years old. He was 22 at that time. And so I just felt sad about that. And I wanted to write a poem honoring him and Father Dave. For Hank Gathers, this is called Hoops. This is a title poem for the book. For Hank Gathers, and it begins with a quote from a song or a lyric by De La Soul. Trees fall so I can play ground with my ink. By a falling cyclone chain-link fence, a black rush streaks for netted hoops, and one alone from a distance breaks above the undulant pack, soars. More a Sunday skywalk, he cups the ball, whirling his arm, swoops down a tomahawk. Radar, don't fly without me. That's Big Earl, who coughs then downs his bottle, a 40 ounce of Old E, and laughter makes its rounds. I'm crossing a footpath of a city block, a short rut that snakes between a lush epitaph of dandelions and weed brush behind Happy Hollow courts. The ghost of a staircase echoes here, sign of lives lived, of souls lost. Faded hues of graffiti lines bombed on a wall. Faye says, don't stop the body rock. At gate's entrance, my gaze follows Radar and his half-cocked jump shot. All morning, I sang hymns, yet thought of his form, his flashing the lane, quick stop to become skyborn. Elbows poised like handlebars, he flicks a wrist. The pill arcs through sunlight glare and splashes the basket's circle of air. A boombox bobs and breaks beats on a buckling sea of asphalt. The hard driving rhymes of BDP, rousing a rowdy crowd of hustlers tossing craps, waging fists, dollar bets. Only louder, one more enraged, promises to pistol whip the punk who doesn't pay. He doubles up, blows a kiss, each dealer counts his days. I turn from these highlights, Spaulding's missile like meteors. Radar dribbles near, you're late. Before I speak a word, my boy, still shooting geometry. We laugh, Father Dave, coach at St. Charles, once let me play as a walk-on in hopes I would tutor Radar. Not even Pythagoras could awaken in his head the elegance of a triangle circumference. 4 years later, he's off on scholarship to UNC. I'm to study Nabokov at State's University. Proof a Pop-Pop's maxim, there's more ways to skin. If the slum's our dungeon, school's our Bethlehem. Yet what connects those dots that rattles in hustlers' palms with Radar's stutter step and my pen's panopticon? It casts shadows dark as tar as we begin our forecourt run. A brick off the half-moon side, in waves we sprint. No set offense. His pass, my bounce, his deft lateral. Two-hand jam. I'm going to skip the second part, just go to the third. The ceiling in my room, a projector's canvas. The moon, a flurried cone of light, to which I recite Brooks, Frost, Hughes. Lying back in my mind, each book's a slide held up like a snapshot. Giant stills illumined by that cyclops eye. Below bunk, my cousin stacks 10s. 20s, pacing corners till 12, he and the Umab gang slinging plastic vials of crack, the cursed slang of death. I'm gonna buy a Gucci watch, Air Nikes, the hypest gear to look fly. Dazed, he says, then cocks a Wesson, what spells in the ovals of dead men's eyes. Other circles festoon above my head, O's on the tongue, yet bitter to the edge. We die soon. A darkness spreads, at first as clouds, floating like this craft-spirited march. Then arise faces of friends resting in caskets. Deshaun, Darnell, Lil Mike, Chantel, a slideshow whose carousel double-quick click ricochet shots across this elegiac. Gazing its portraits, I muse, this ceiling's more their grave than lower my eyes to toss my grief on the shelf of their sinking coffins beside that lone rose laid for dear parting. And here rise from earth the hurt motto bred as my pen's pitch of dirt pyramids my dread. Tomorrow. That's how I'm living, kid. Tomorrow. Only it was Tupac on the radio waves, Thug to Life. By song's end, he's martyred again. My cousin lounges back inside the rap's refrain, fingering his square sack of spliff. He lip-syncs his resurrected lyrics. His pain shrinks in drags of dialect. I call it maddeningly elusive, yet endlessly tempting. Like a far-off scream, like a mannequin leaning backseat into other mannequins careening, it could stand for something, just about, but gauzy and gray, great slabs ease over and root-like stems wither. The radio plays, reducing us to a point. Laugh and laugh, it says, even as a box of Kleenex scrapes your hand. The neighborhood sparks and becomes that blue haze, screams inside of screens, which will not stop the coming of frost, merely more frames. If I said all ants are fascists, would that be the comic turn? When the eyes fill up, a kind of composting, an occasion dresses for the mountainside, Mardi Gras in the hills, downpour of skeins, each brilliant spiraling suicide, a paper float like this one here. But then a father sets his pieces on a chessboard, the way a painter spreads out vials of colors on a windowsill. And even this reminds me of emptying brown bags of groceries. Always first, cauliflower, the little white trees felled in the bins. Then miniature vats of yogurt. Then slender bodies of asparagus, dry heaving beneath a blanket of plastic. A woman sets her keys on the counter through involuntary tears. Something releases, like a red balloon one forgets one never owned. And in her right eye she feels her spasms, and in her left the swell of peppermint pulls her towards the center of a far-off cry. Then something else lets go, the ancient wetness of clouds washing the sidewalks of memory. Here and there, smoke rises from asphalt like tranquil fires smoldering, or fog lifting, like so many dead at once. That eternal chorus hurts. Okay. Again, thank you all for coming. I'm willing to answer questions if you like, but this will be the last one. I drove cross-country on my way to University of Oregon for graduate school, and I got stopped for speeding in Hays, Kansas. And it's hard not to speed in Kansas. You just want to go. So in graduate school, I remembered, I was very reflective about that, this is Native American country. This country once belonged to another people of which very small communities exist. So that was there, and I was also listening to an album by Wayne Shorter that featured a trumpet player named Freddie Hubbard. Indian song. Freddie Hubbard's playing the cassette deck, 40 miles outside Hays, and I've looked at this Kansas sunset for 3 hours now, bristling as big rigs bounce and grumble along I-70. At this speed, cornfields come in splotches, murky yellows and greens abutting the road's shoulder, the flat wealth of the nation whirring by. It's a kind of ornamentation I've gotten used to, as in a dream, espaliered against the skies blazing, cloud luffs cascade lace-like, darkening whole fields. 30,000 feet above, someone is buttering a muffin. Someone stares at a skyphone, and momentarily a baby cries in pressurized air. Through double-paned squares, someone squints, fields cross-hatched by asphalt strips. It is said Cezanne looked at a landscape so long he felt as if his eyes were bleeding. No matter that, I'm heading west. It's all so redolent, this wailing music by my side, you fingering fields of light, sunflowers over earth, miles traveled, a patchwork of goodbyes. Thank you.